This is the part 2 of the Saltwater series with the Isle on the Fly, and we have 3 incredible co-hosts. Stacy Lynn, that lives in Texas. We have Joanne Hessney, who lives in, Florida and New York. And then we have Circe that lives in Atlanta. So pretty incredible opportunity to learn from 3 different women from all over the United States.
Hi, everyone. Well, I want to thank United Women on the Fly for having me tonight. And I'm so thrilled to be co-hosting with Joanne and Stacy. Both are very experienced anglers and professionals. I'm sure going to be learning from them tonight too. So a little bit about myself. I've been fly fishing since 2011 after I joined the Georgia Women Fly Fishers. I live in Atlanta, so saltwater is not really in my backyard. I do have to, travel for, 6 hours to get to the coast. My first saltwater trip was in 2013. We went for redfish in the Louisiana. And since then, I just keep, going back. I've been back there for a few times more. And also I have been visiting Xcalac, Mexico to fish. Also the Andros in the Bahamas, South Carolina, Georgia, and also Florida. And lately I've been going to Belize a lot because I'm just obsessed with the permit over there. All right, so with all those trips, I definitely make a lot of mistakes, but I also learn a lot. And also there's some things that I wish I knew beforehand. So tonight I'm going to share with you my lessons learned and some tips, and hopefully make your next trip, the chances of success is going to be higher. All right, so first, when let's say if you have decided to go to the Bahamas to catch some bonefish, you'll be thinking about when to go, right? So the prime time to me is going to be when the fish are around and they are active. Now, that piece of information, you can definitely ask your angler friends who have been there before. You can also do a lot of research on the internet. You can read fishing reports. You can ask your local fly shops. And also, if you're booking with a guide shop, a guide service or a lodge, they will definitely make some recommendations. But they may also tell you that the fish is year-round, you can catch them anytime, which is true if you have a good professional guy, he or she will be able to find fish for you under most circumstances. But we are talking about how to maximize your chances of success here. So I think the next major ingredient is going to be the sun. So for saltwater fly fishing, you need to sight fishing, and there will be little blind casting. And you and your guide have to be able to spot the fish. And so you need sun for that. And also you will need to be able to cast to them. So you want to go to a time that is not too windy, and you want to be comfortable on the water. For example, May and June is supposed to be a lot of bonefish in the Andros, the Bahamas. However, this is also when the horsefly is going to come out very active and can bite through your clothes and draw blood. So you might want to be, over there during May or June. And also the temperature could be a factor too, right? You don't want to be too hot and it's not comfortable. So that's why, when I, before I decide when to go, I will look at the average weather of my destination. So this is the average weather of Belize, St. Pedro in Belize. If you look at, on the left-hand side, the month of February and March, definitely you got the most clear skies. The sight fishing going to be easier. August and September is going to be harder because there's, a lot more cloud cover. And also the rainfalls, June and October are going to be worse. So that's another thing that you need to consider. Looking at the wind, June, on average is going to be windier than the rest of the year. Now, I've been to St. Pedro, this area, 5 times in the past year. And every time I have a day or two at least that I have to deal with 20 miles per hour plus wind. So you have to deal with windy condition one way or the other. But some months it's just going to be a little bit worse than the other months. Looking at the temperature, the month of August, September definitely is going to be the hottest months of the year, so you'll be less comfortable on the water. However, in this area, the big tarpon starts showing up in June and it's going to be all the way until October. So maybe the summer months is not that bad, but you just have to get up early, start fishing like 6 o'clock, so that you'll be done early and won't be too hot. The wind directions also plays a role. So if you see it right here, November, there's a lot of north wind coming from the north. That means cold fronts moving in. That means changing weather, right? So the fish, when weather changing, they need some time to adjust. So it might impact the fishery too. All right, so now you have in your mind, you cannot decide on the month. So how about which dates should I go? And one thing that you may want to consider is the tide. Here I have the tide chart of St. Simon's Islands in Georgia for the month of April this year. The blue arrows indicate the high tides, and then the red arrows indicate the low tide. When your tide is going from low to high, that's incoming tide. When your tide is coming from going down from high to low, that is the outgoing tide. There's a term called spring tide, and spring tide occurs, during full moon or new moon. That's when the moon and sun on the earth in alignment. So your sun will add to the gravitational pull. So during spring tide, your tide is going to be, your high tide is going to be higher and your low tide is going to be lower. So look at here on April 1st, this is a new moon. And the high tide is going to be 7.3 feet high, which is higher compared to the other days. And then there's something called neap tide too. So neap tide occurs, during the first quarter moon or the third quarter moon. That is when the moon is kind of like a half moon. So during this time, the tide is going to be weaker. So your high tide is going to be lower and your low tide is going to be higher. There's another term called Perigean spring tide, which occurs, when the full moon or the new moon coincides with the perigee of the moon, which is the point when the moon is closest to the earth. During that time, your tide is going to be higher too. It'll be extra higher, and it probably occurs 6 to 8 times per year. And some refer this Perigean spring tide as king tides or flood tides. Another term here is slack water. Slack water means, the water has little or no movement. If you fish in the saltwater flats, that means, when the tide reaches the highest point, and it's going to be turn around and recede, or when your tides, at the lowest point, and then it's going to be rising again. Slack water, probably lasts for 2 to 3 hours. And some consider this to be the, not so good, worst time to fish, because your bait level will drop off and your fish is not going to be as active. However, I caught plenty of bonefish during slack water. The bonefish just hanging out, doesn't matter. They're in the shallow, you cast to them, they still take the flies. But maybe perm is a little bit more difficult during slack water. So what is the best tides for fishing? I personally like incoming tides because it the ocean bring in fresh water, bring in clear water, bring in lower water temperature and the oxygen. So I like incoming tides, and especially incoming tides with the right sun angle. That means, morning from, 8 o'clock until 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. How about spring tide, neap tide, or king tide, flood tides? Which one is better? If you ask different people, they're going to give you different answers. I remember Amy Hazel in the last United Women on the Fly meeting, she mentions that she prefer neap tide. And then there's some folks that they won't fish during full moon for various reasons. And then some fish, could be better at a certain condition. For example, it is very popular to fish for redfish during the flood tides in the fall, because then your marsh will have more water, and the redfish can cruise surrounding it and ambush the bait, the bait fish. And regardless, be very careful with the tides, because when you're low tide, you can wade to a spot, but then when the tides come up, you may have a hard time coming back. So always check for the tide before you go out. I have an app on my phone, the new tide, NAUTIDE app, so that I can have tide information handy.
You can all get lost in tides. You could get really lost in tides because there's not only neap tides and spring tides, there's diurns, 30 different really good saltwater guides. Every single one of them is going to pick a different tide that they like to fish. So to Circe's point, in the beginning, don't worry so much about the tides because you could get really caught up in it. And you don't want to not take a trip because you don't think the tide's going to be right. And only last comment, which is just an added comment, because I thought Circe really did a great job, my friend, is if you are in a lodge and you remember first and foremost and for always that you're paying for your guide. And at the end of the day, if you just aren't, it's just not working. You're just not clicking. You get right to the fishing manager of that lodge. You don't need to fish for 5 or 6, even 2 consecutive days with someone that it's just not working for you. And I promise you that most lodges, most reputable lodges, won't blink an eye, and they'll scramble, they'll rearrange so that you're fishing with someone else.
All right, a few more tips about trip planning. I recommend definitely at least plan 4 days of fishing, if not more. Because some days the weather's not going to be as ideal. Like in the picture in here, it was totally dark that morning. We didn't see a single fish. So you want extra days. And also I like to add a days, or 2 for sightseeing and relaxing so that, you can rest mentally and physically. And plus you get to experience the local culture. And I like to have that sightseeing day on the day that the tide is not as good. And then I cannot stress enough that for saltwater fly fishing, you do need a very good fishing guide. A good fishing guide can, use his or her knowledge, find the fish, depending on, in a vast area, right? And depending on the tides, the water clarity, the wind direction, and all that. And, and for the most part, the guy will be spotting the fish for you and tell you where to cast. So you and your guy will be working as a team. So a good guy definitely will be really, really advantageous. And if you have a bad fishing guide, then you'll be a waste of time and money and maybe even ruin one of a lifetime opportunity. So definitely, do your research, get some references, find a guy who is local to the area because they know the best. If you book with a lodge or outfitter, make sure that if you can, request your guide instead of letting them assign you a guide. Because, if you know which one is better, of course, you want to request the guy to guide you, right? The other thing is like, many good fishing guides, in the US or even in a foreign country, for the prime time is really have to book like many months ahead, some maybe even a year ahead. So I will plan ahead and don't wait until last minute to book your guide. So, okay, I have a little quiz here. We got 5 fish and you can see the dorsal fins. And can you name the fish? I'll give you a minute. You can write down a piece of paper, make a mental note. You ready? All right. The first one is a shark. Sorry, I throw you a curveball. B is a permit. C is a bonefish. And D is a tarpon, and E is a snook. So anybody got it all correct here? I bet there's somebody. Well, if you got it all correct, oh, there you go. Joanne, of course. Yeah. Well, you are way better than when I first started chasing this fish, except the shark. I never really tried to chase the shark, but I really didn't know that much when I started fishing for them. I wish that I spent the time and learned about them early on, so that I have better success. So what we're trying to learn here is the look, like how the dorsal fins look like, how the tail looks like, how do they distinguish from each other. So the permit, the fin is kind of black in color versus the bonefish fins is going to be translucent. You also want to, see how they how the push might look like, the push, the wake that create on the water looks like, how they roll, tarpon, how they roll maybe looks like on the water. You want to understand if they like grass bottom, do they like salt bottom? What type of food do they like? Crabs, shrimps and bayfish and all that. And do they like shallow water or do they like deep water? Do they like incoming tides or outgoing tides? Things like that. And definitely, you can find a lot of this information on the internet. If you go to YouTube, search for like tailing pyramid, you're going to see tons of videos. And then also, your fellow anglers, fly shops, and definitely your guide. Guide will be a very good resources. So when you first go on the boat, ask your guide what you should be looking for and ask the guide to tell you about the fish. A few more tips about trip preparation. Definitely check your gear before the trip. Make sure that, let's say your sunglasses, make sure that if you have a prescription, make sure the prescription is up to date for your fly line on your reel. Clean it before, and I use something like a reel Agent X to clean my line before the trip. Make sure it's nice and smooth for casting, and organize your flies. Buy and tie your flies, whatever you do, and organize your fly box. I'm kind of obsessed with that, so I weight my flies and organize it by weight. Also, get the leaders, get the tippets, and all that stuff. And I know that, some guide surveys, it might include leaders, tippets, and flies in the guide package, which is very nice. But also know that in many of those places, going to be very remote. In some foreign countries, it's very hard for the guide surveys to get those items. So I would like to have extra myself and also want to help out too. So anybody follow J-Boat Art on the Instagram? This is a cartoon, and I from him. His cartoons really depicts the funny moments and also the stressful moments on a saltwater fly fishing boat. Here you got an angler has a line wrapping all around his leg and also wrapped around the console, and there's a dolphin that he is trying to catch. So the leg parts definitely happened to me before, and in fact more than once. So I would say that line management is very important. Usually, as soon as the boats stop to a location, I'm getting ready to fish. I strip all my line out. I will cast it out and strip back so that the line will be piling correctly on the platform. And I will do it, like once in a while, just in case too, because as you're cruising around looking for fish, you might have to clear again. And I try not to have too much line out, only with the amount that I can cast and also with the amounts that I need. I like to wear a pair of socks that have cushion, doing cushion socks, and so that if I stand on my line, I will feel it. One time I have camera clipped on my belt and the line wrapped around the belt, and that cost me a very nice redfish. Once the redfish started to run, it was gone. So just be careful with that too. Okay, so I would like to kind of touch on the mental aspect of saltwater fly fishing. So we are spending very long days on the water looking for fish, and there may be long period of time that's really nothing. And so, I have to tell myself to be patient and also to remain focused. And this is a picture of some tailing pyramids. Boatmate Tammy, she took that picture while I was on the platform, trying to be ready to cast. And as soon as I see those pyramid tails, my heart just started racing. I rushed my cast, delivered cast, just snap on the water. I wasn't listening to my guide. I was so preoccupied by my mistake, and it just, keep piling up those, thoughts in me. So I would say, try to slow down, try to cast normally, and listen. No, that's very hard, because to me it's very hard, because I have to react in a split second to something that, I really wanted so much. And there's so much pressure. And some of you guys, who may be competing in, participating in some competitive sports, you might have some tips that you use or techniques that you use to dealing with the pressure. For me, I actually asked Kat Valerie. She is the current world record holder of catching permit with 4-pound test and 6-pound test. And she also finished the 3rd place in 2020 IGFA permit fly fishing tournament. I felt like against 18 other men, I really admire her. And I thought that if anybody would know how to deal with pressure, it would be her. So I asked her tips. So this is what she shared with me. Think of every shot as a clean slate, that you can start all over again. And don't beat up yourself with the mistake that you made already. And try to practice mindfulness on the water. So to bring yourself back to the present. So, close your eyes and the sun shining on you, feel the breeze, feel the temperature and all that. And just remember you're there to have fun. So don't get too serious and then it's not fun anymore. So I hope you found these tips helpful and thank you so much and feel free to reach out.
My name is Captain Stacy Lynn. Just a brief introduction. I've been involved in the sport, in the industry of fly fishing for over 25 years, working primarily in fly shops. I've been teaching and coaching for over 20 years. I'm a certified instructor. I would like to see more women become certified instructors, especially in my state. And I've been a passionate saltwater angler since about year 3 of fly fishing. It took me over a dozen trips to the coast in a span of about 7 months for me to catch my first redfish. And so I like to share that with people so that they know that this really is a process. It's something that you do have to work at to become good at. And I'm here to kind of help with that. The challenge was one of the main things that really excited me about saltwater. And I was learning back before there were all these wonderful resources available, like United Women on the Fly and YouTube. And this was back before the internet almost. So there were very, very few resources. So it's really great to be a part of a community that is so sharing and giving with knowledge and experiences, and I'm so excited to be a part of that. I do have my captain's license. I'm a licensed saltwater guide in Texas. For about every hour that I run my boat, I spend about 8 or 9 hours pushing it. I like to share that perspective. Also, I am to the point in my fly fishing where I prefer being on the back of the boat than I do the front of the boat. What I tell my clients is there's a lot less pressure on the back of the boat than there is on the front. And I'm really glad that Circe kind of spoke to some of the mental game that goes on with that. I am in the middle of a relocation up the coast of Texas from Rockport, which is in the middle coast, to the northern part of the Texas coast. I now live on Galveston Island, where I am working to open a brand new fly fishing shop called Galveston Fishing Company. So I'm super excited to be opening a new shop again. This one is going to be pretty much saltwater specific, saltwater products, the coastal lifestyle, guiding and instruction. And we'll be opening up here in later this spring, early summer. I'd just like to share, if any of you are involved with other clubs in your areas, would be interested in a saltwater presentation. Well, first of all, I think you ought to contact Circe, because she rocked it. But other than that, I love to do presentations and have had some really wonderful experiences giving presentations on saltwater fly fishing to clubs all over the country. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. I'm doing a very low tech. My topic this evening has to do with basically ideas that came from observations and comparisons that I was noticing from my perspective on the polling platform as I was watching anglers of various skill levels fish. It kind of, a main thought to start off with is, as a novice, you don't often know what you don't know. A lot of times you don't even know what you don't know until you meet somebody who knows what you don't know. And then you have the proverbial, I never thought of that moment. And so I'm hoping that maybe some of this information that we're talking about tonight inspires you that way, gives you some new challenges and some new things to think about. In my musings from the polling platform, as I like to call it, I started trying to figure out how I could give insight to new fly fishers on what experienced or expert anglers do in their fishing. And so I started with a list. And as I pondered it and kind of shared some ideas and asked some questions with clients, one of them suggested that I base it on Stephen R. Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I thought that that was a really kind of fun approach to it, and have just kind of transposed that a bit. Here is my list. This is not a dissertation. It's a collection of observations, and that I feel that I'm uniquely qualified to compile and share. I think of it as pulling back the curtain on what expert anglers do in the fishing moment and in preparing for saltwater fly fishing. I hope that you use it to expand your thinking and maybe drive your skills development as you go forward as a continually progressing fly fisher. I'm going to present these points in a combination of order and of importance, and also in the order that they happen in the fishing process. So here we go. Highly successful saltwater anglers, number one, are accurate. I've used a diagram of a target, and this is actually a very appropriate sized target for what I use in my practice and in my teaching. So those of you that have been practicing your casting to a hula hoop, you need to put that hula hoop away and go get a Frisbee or a paper plate or one of those great soccer cones. You need to reduce your target range. And I like to say that circle about 4-inch is your target, and the margin of error is about the size of a dinner plate. Accuracy is the most important thing about your casting effort. So let me say that again. Accuracy is the most important thing about your casting effort. This was one of the few things that were told, that I was told very early on, even before I had a fly rod in my hand, was that I was working towards achieving consistent accuracy. If you're not practicing accuracy every time you go out to practice your casting, then you're doing your fishing a disservice. So you need to be setting some targets out and practicing to them at all distance and with all casting styles. So I beat the accuracy drum pretty loudly, and it has application in all styles of fly fishing, whether it's saltwater, warm water, cold water. Accuracy, number one. Okay, number two, highly successful saltwater anglers have loop control, and they are able to manipulate their loop in size, shape, speed, and trajectory. So I drew my little illustration here, trying to show a loop going down and towards the fish target. This is something that the concept trajectory is something that a lot of people that are moving from freshwater fishing into saltwater fishing have to really learn, especially if you're standing on the bow or on a casting platform on the bow of a boat. So your elevation has gone up. So you need to be driving that fly down towards the water. I'm a huge advocate, once again, beating the accuracy drum. I'm a huge advocate for the practice of what's called fly first presentation. So I practice that out in the field so that it's second nature when I'm out on the bow of the boat. In order to be super accurate, before the fly even hits the target, you are in control of your loop. So understanding that you need to be working towards tightening or narrowing your loop, and then making them while they're tight or while they're narrow, making them move faster, making them move slower while maintaining their shape, and then working on that trajectory to that target. I see someone says, number 3, highly successful saltwater anglers make lots of casts. So lots and lots of casts. They make lots of casts in the practice field, and they make lots of casts when they're out on the water. So in conversations with several clients that are progressing anglers, when I've asked them, maybe I've called out a fish, or a lot of times I'll indicate that I see something, and it's worth paying some attention to. Or maybe from my perspective, maybe I have some glare and I'm asking the angler, hey, do you see that? They don't make a move towards making a cast at it. I always start day out with some key phrases, and one of them, that no shame balls will be thrown on my boat at the caster who makes casts at something that turns out not to be a fish. And so I like my anglers to hunt with the fly. And I've had several of them respond that, well, if they're not positive that it's a fish, they don't want to cast at it and then miss casting at an actual fish. And that's just the wrong way to approach it. Treat it as practice. Cast at clump of grass or a depression or a stick up in the water, and imagine what it would be like if that were a fish. Or if you're not sure it's a fish, if you don't cast at it, you're not going to find out positively. And a lot of times it's a great way to have a pleasant surprise with a hookup. Make lots of casts. Your casting skill is developed when you're casting. All right, so number 4, highly successful saltwater anglers are effective and efficient in alternate casting styles. So this means backhand, cross-bodied, and sidearm with minimal body motion. So my illustration for that is the perspective of a right-handed caster with a fish that has appeared to 3 o'clock, which is off your right shoulder. And you can't turn and cast on your rod hand side of your body, because that would pass the line, the leader, and the sharp pointy thing attached to that leader over the boat. There are some freshwater guides that might permit that, but on a skiff, that's generally not a good idea. So you need to learn how to make a backhand cast presentation. If there was one alternative style of casting that you should practice, it would be learning to present a backhand cast. And it's a super simple transition to aim your backhand stroke down and towards the target. So in this case, the back of my hand moving down and towards the target on the water, and my forehand stroke moving up and away from the target. This would definitely be a skill that you should add to your skill set. It's also a skill set that works great in freshwater fishing when the wind is blowing at your casting shoulder. So for a right-hand caster, the wind blowing right at their right shoulder. It's also the cast that you would use if you were fishing in the front of a raft or a drift boat, and you were needing to make casts to river right, which is the right-hand bank. Here again, that means the fish is on the right side of the boat, which is the same side of the boat as your casting arm if you're a right-hand caster, and passing the fly over the head of your guide or over the head of your fishing friend, not a great approach. So learning how to either do a cross-bodied cast or present your back cast is a highly effective alternative style. Skilled anglers, experienced saltwater anglers, this is one of their best tools. Achieve accuracy even at distance with this cast. So all it takes is a little practice. All right, number 5, highly successful saltwater anglers know how to hunt for fish. They know the where and how of finding fish. And this is a connection to something that Circe brought up and illustrated in her presentation, where she was showing you what the dorsal fins of various species look like. So learning to, one, pick up on that, and then identify whether or not the shape of that fin, whether it's a dorsal fin or a tail fin. In my water, is that a redfish? Is it a black drum? Is it a speckled sea trout? Or is it a mullet? Learning how to hunt for fish involves a pretty broad skill set. On my boat, we talk about nervous water. Nervous water, it can be an indication of a game fish. It can be an indication of bait fish, in which case, why are they nervous? Is there a predator in the area that is hurting them? We also talk about the difference between a wake and a push up here. Different parts of the fish's body making these disturbances on the surface of the water. So a push is made by the fish's head and shoulders, and it makes a big rounded wake. It usually means that they're swimming with their heads closer to the surface of the water. And then on a wake being more pointed, this is usually the indication of the fish's tail making a disturbance on the surface of the water. And so in each of these cases, if you're going to cast at either a wake push, your fly placement's going to be a little bit different. You're going to lead a wake further because the fish's head is out in front of the wake. But with a push, you're going to place your fly a little closer to a push because the head of the fish is making the push. And then as far as hunting is concerned, I frequently mention PPE. People have definitely connected with this abbreviation context of our pandemic, but it actually stands for pockets, points, and edges. And so these are physical structures, maybe on a shoreline or a creek or a small lake that you might be working the area. And just like in freshwater fishing, fish are seeking out an easy way to feed. And so a lot of times the structure will collect bait and the fish will be moving down a shoreline, down an edge, or be working in a pocket, or they'll be hanging out around the point of an edge. So we fish a lot of shorelines in Texas. And so the fish in the PPE is a great tactical approach to hunting for fish. All right, number 6, highly successful saltwater anglers have fishing process Prawlness. So this means that they're very engaged with not only their casting, but what's happening once the fly hits the water. And Circe mentioned a really key element to fishing Prawlness, and that is line management. You need to know where your prepped and readied line is. In control, is it on the boat or is it under your foot or has it blown off the boat and is now snagged up in the grass or in the coral? So line management is a key concept to fishing process prowess. The other part of it is knowing where your fly lands. Yeah, that's something that you really got to kind of practice and pay attention to and learn how to determine where did your fly enter the water. The tip of your fly line should be pointed at where the fly lands, but the length of your leader is, you need to kind of understand if you're fishing a short leader or a longer leader, where that fly actually entered. You also need to be aware of whether or not you have slack in your line. At that point, once the fly is in the water and you're in the fishing zone, reading how the fish reacts to the fly. So most saltwater fly fishing is done in a sight casting environment, whether you're fishing in super, super clear water where you see the shape of the fish in the water, or maybe you see its shadow on the bottom. Bone fishing, their scales are very silvery and they reflect the bottom. Sometimes it's really hard to see the fish, but a lot of times you can see the dark shadow below them. Here in Texas, if there are any of my clients in the audience, they know that I have become very skilled at fishing in murky or dirty water. And that's a skill set that I encourage everybody to challenge themselves with, because you could make a trip to the other side of the planet and storms blow up and the water gets dirty. And so you can still sight cast, you're just looking for some different indications from fish. And so once you place the fly in front of that fish, understanding what it is that you're seeing and the behavior of that fish. Did they have a reaction to the fly? Was it positive or was it negative? Did they turn and run off, or did they make a move towards the fly? And are they interpreting it as being something alive and something that would be tasty to eat? So my illustration here, using my shape of a fish, I've written in, did the fish see the fly? Is it going to eat the fly? Is it following the fly? And do I strip slow or do I strip fast? And so that's my kind of interpretation, my illustration of reading the fish, knowing that once the cast is made and the fly lands on target, now the real fun starts. How are you going to get that fish to eat the fly? And kind of shorthand, this process is often referred to as learning how to feed the fish. Certainly having the opportunity or making the opportunity to cast at lots of fish is a big part of learning that process and paying attention and watching the fly react. Quite often, especially with redfish and some other saltwater species, we'll actually see their gills flare as they open their mouth and create a vacuum and suck the fly in. And that's how we know that they've eaten, is we actually see it happen. A lot of times you won't necessarily know that the fish is eaten until you feel tension on the line. But a lot of times, if you pay attention to their body language, a fish will tell you when they've eaten. I'm sure Circe knows or is learning that just that little bit of kind of a wiggle motion that a bonefish will give you when it's pounced on the fly is a good indication that the line's about to come tight and the fight's about to commence. Read the fish and feed the fish is what I mean about the fishing process Prawlness. Okay, and then the number 7, the last of the skill set that highly successful saltwater anglers exhibit is they know how to finish strong. So my illustration is winning the trophy. And what I mean by this is that from hook set to hero shot, the process that happens should be smooth. You should remain calm. but you should also be reactive to the fishing process or the fish fighting process. And you should learn to be very efficient with that. And efficiency can mean something like in red fishing, redfish are very interesting fish to fight. There's no rhyme or reason to whether or not they're going to clear your slack line off the boat and then be pulling the line off your reel, or whether or not you're going to be stripping them in like you frequently do when you're freshwater fishing. And it has nothing to do with fish size. I've had 20-inch fish that have pulled me into my backing, and I've had 40+ inch redfish that I had to basically hand line in. And just being able to be reactive with that and be very efficient with that process once the hook set has been achieved. Understanding that in that fishing process where you're stripping the fly, your rod tip needs to be touching the water. You need to execute a strip set, which is adding tension to the line once the fish has eaten, and avoiding traditional reaction for freshwater anglers that are transitioned into saltwater to execute a trout set. Now, there are situations where a reaction similar to a trout set is very appropriate. What a trout set does is it takes up slack very quickly. So if you're in that fishing situation and the fish has eaten the fly and you need to get tension in the line really quickly, you can kind of combine a strip set with a trout set. Yes, I said it. You can strip set with a trout set in saltwater. The main thing is getting the tension on that line and getting that hook set achieved. And then learning how to fight and play a fish. I like to describe the fish fighting process as being a dance. And the fish gets to lead the first half of the dance. And then as you're able to work the fish closer to you, closer to the boat, and you're putting some pressure on them and they're starting to wear down, that's when you kind of take control of the dance and work it to your advantage. You might be utilizing counter pressure if the fish runs to the left. You might be dropping your rod tip down to the right and counter pressuring the rod towards your right. I recommend bracing the butt of the rod against your torso in the fish fight. I don't like to see the tip of the rod peer over the top of the angler's head unless it's an emergency situation. So I like to have the fish being fought with a low rod angle. I like to see the bend in the rod go into the butt. So bend it to the butt in that fish fighting process, especially for the bigger game fish like tarpon, big permit, GTs, big redfish, any of those larger species, or a long-running bonefish. The butt of the rod has more power in it. And so a low rod angle will add to kind of that fighting the fish from the butt section of the rod. And then once you're finishing up your dance with this fish, you need to have a plan for bringing the fish to hand, whether you're using a net or whether the guide is going to help land the fish. You need to be talking through that possibly and making a plan so that you can stick the landing. The other thing is, if you're going to take some photos, then have the camera out, have a whole plan for how you're going to execute those photos quickly without having the fish be out of the water for any extended period of time, or even taking the photos while the fish is still in the water. And that certainly helps with that. I know that a lot of saltwater guides don't use a net. I think that we're seeing a transition into that, and a transition away from fish handling devices like boga grips and whatnot. Also, just learning how to properly handle the fish with care. A couple of social media hashtags that I'll use from time to time are hashtag stop the lip grip and hashtag stop the gill grip. I like to see fish handled very respectfully. I know that Heather is a great resource and educator on proper fish handling, and that applies to saltwater fish. A lot of people think of saltwater fish and warm water species too as being very hardy fish, and they are. You can do a lot of damage when you handle them improperly. Now that I've presented you with these 7 skills that have come from my observations of fishing with very experienced anglers and fishing with not so experienced anglers, what can you do with? So here's what I recommend. Use this maybe as a baseline for where you are in your fishing. Make a plan for adding some skills. You can kind of figure out what you need to learn and then where you're going to need to put the work in to get better. We're all progressing anglers. There's not an end to what you can do with this sport. And that may be completely frightening and intimidating to you. And but I find it very comforting to know I still have a lot to learn in my fishing. And most of the time, I'm learning it from somebody else. Occasionally, I'm learning it directly from the fish. So the other thing that I would recommend that you do is practice. Practice, practice. Practice and fail. Practice, practice, and improve. Practice in realistic conditions. Practice in the wind. There's nothing that will teach you what wind techniques to utilize more effectively than going out, making practice casts in the wind. Practice from an elevated platform. Take a step stool out or cooler, especially if it has plenty of cold beer for your practice session, and stand on it and get used to that perspective, that elevation, that trajectory, all, because that's probably different if all you've done is wade fishing. Embrace the fact that you are improving and you're progressing, and that should build your confidence. So a lot of things that I spoke about in the 7 essential skills come from the fact that experienced anglers have a lot of confidence in their fishing. And a big part of that has come from practicing. So my last tip on how to kind of put into practice some of or all of these 7 essential skills is go fishing with experts, or at least someone who has more experience than you, and pay attention to what they do. Watch them in the fishing process. Another thing that I like to do that it's been very, very helpful for my development as a fly angler, both in freshwater and in saltwater, is that when I'm fishing with a guide or I'm fishing with somebody who's super experienced, is I ask them to think out loud. And I invite them to just almost like a steady stream of consciousness of the fishing process, even if it includes their grocery list, to just think out loud, because really good anglers and guides are a couple of steps ahead of what's happening at the moment. And that really has taught me how to plan and how to execute and how to be smooth and efficient, and also to be really, really confident in my fishing. And just remember that experts or more experienced anglers, they're not superhuman. They just have put in more casts. And that's something that you can easily do if you get started really, really soon, is get out there and do some practices and challenge yourself.
The number 6, it was the fishing process Prawlness.
Prawlness.
Okay.
Prawlness. Yeah, I had to look that word up to make sure I was using the right, not prowling, but Prawlness. Skill, experience, yeah, all of that.
So you all recognize me if I wear my hat. A couple comments on the 2 folks who went ahead of me, who were both great. You know, I'm a big fan of the Nike theory. Just do it. Do not get hung up in the, I promise you that Circe and Stacy and I could keep you up until sunrise talking about this and that and this and that and this and that. And will scare you. I could scare you right off the water. I went fly fishing with 5 women in Belize the first time I ever set foot in saltwater. God only knows I had no idea what I was doing. And I travel a great deal now with those 5 women, literally all around the world. And we've gone from, hooking my guide 2 times the first time because I thought I was the clock. I thought 12 o'clock was wherever I was looking versus 12 o'clock being the front of the boat. And you've heard Circe and you've heard Stacy both say practice, practice, practice. It seems crazy, but it's probably the most important thing you'll hear tonight out of anything any of us say. I volunteered. I told Heather I'd be happy to talk about the ins and outs of travel, and in particular international travel, although I'm going to touch a little bit on domestic travel as well of tech here. Circe had a beautiful slide presentation. Stacy had beautiful posts, and I'm just talking. And anybody who's ever interested in anything that I say tonight feel free to reach out to me. I promise. I'm a retired critical care physician. For many, many years, I gave people my personal cell number. I would give it to anyone who's watching tonight. And my personal promise is if I don't answer, I'm in the shower and I will call you back as soon as I can. Otherwise, I answer that phone unless I'm out of the country. So the first tip I have is how do I even plan a trip? And of course, there's the do-it-yourself versus the travel company versus kind of a combo piece, and I'll explain that in a bit. The travel company is probably the simplest, and in many ways, maybe the safest in the beginning if you're looking at international travel. And I'm going to mention a few individuals and companies and lodges tonight, and it's by no means all inclusive. They're just ones that I know. Almost all of them are women-owned and women-operated. I've been really grateful, been mentored by some fantastic female fishermen in this country, and so I'm going to mention a few of them tonight. Travel companies that I, just right off the top of my head, that if you haven't heard of these, at least the first 2 I'm going to mention, you haven't saltwater fished or traveled internationally. One is the Yellow Dog Fly Fishing Adventures in Montana. Fantastic group of people. Orvis Adventures in Manchester, Vermont. Fantastic group of people. And then a more local, of which I'm sure there are many throughout the company, but one that I personally have used is Tailwaters, which is a fly shop in Dallas, Texas, but they have a significant travel arm. Those are great businesses to reach out to. They kind of manage everything for you. They will talk to you about the weather. They will talk to you about the tides. They will talk to you about how well you do or don't cast. They will talk to you about travel, better times of the year, worst times of the year, insurance. They, from A to Z, on big trips, say the Seychelles, which is a very difficult trip, just the distance and travel. They manage every piece of it from A to Z, from the time you leave the country to the time you get back. I was in Johannesburg, South Africa, 2 years ago when the United States closed their borders. I was traveling on my way home from the Seychelles with Yellow Dog. The airport there went crazy. People went out of their minds trying to decipher how they were going to get home. Yellow Dog had me set up with a travel company that was watching, knew what was happening before it happened, and I flew out 2 days after I was originally supposed to fly out on a Delta flight. I never worried about anything with those folks. So there's the travel company. Again, it's really all inclusive. And those 2, Yellow Dog has a wildly successful international. I mean, you name it, they'll get you there. Orvis is getting bigger by the year. And again, there are lodges and fly shops all over the country that host trips. So my combo, so I said there's do-it-yourself and travel. My combo approach is kind of the individual fly shops that host trips. And I didn't know she was going to be on here tonight staring at me, but I wanted to use Rachel Finn as an example. She's a lead guide up at the Hungry Trout, which is in the Adirondack regions of New York. And I know Rachel speaks fluent Spanish now because she just got back here from Patagonia, where she hosted a trip, the Hungry Trout, and Rachel hosted a trip to Patagonia. I mean, what a great way to travel with someone you know or will know when you land, and can feel very safe. And Rachel, I know, mentors her people right through those tests. I know that Carly Rowland out in Idaho often host trips. Kate Crump with her husband, Justin, who owns Frigate Travel, often hosts trips, Alaska and Oregon. And then Captain Stacy, now my new connection in Texas for red fishing. These are all, this site is an incredible resource. My friend Tia, who was in that picture with me, we just got back from Belize late last night. She lives in Dallas. She's going to be in Fort Lauderdale with her two sons in a, lacrosse tournament this coming weekend, and she wants to fish. So, we've reached out to some of the folks that are on this screen tonight, and we've hooked up with a guide in Key Biscayne. And despite it being spring break in Miami, I'm going to drive over and meet her, and we're going to fish next Monday and Tuesday in Key Biscayne. So this site is probably unheralded, one of the best sites on the internet to feel safe and secure and talk to people. You could call me up and say, Joanne, what was your experience with Rachel in Patagonia? Or what was your experience with Rachel in Oregon? And I'm happy to talk. And there's everyone on this site will do the same. The do-it-yourself is kind of hard, but not out of the question. That's where you are going to individually reach out to lodges. I don't think I would ever recommend, I'm looking to see what Stacy's and Circe's heads do when I say, I don't think I would ever recommend that any beginner, novice, or even intermediate saltwater fly fisher person try to set up their own travel and their own do-it-yourself fishing in a foreign environment. My guide over the weekend kept saying, he calls me John, he can't quite say Joanne. It's a big ocean. It's a big ocean. Gordy, where'd the permit go? He goes, it's a big ocean. It is a very big ocean. Even when you're in the Caribbean or you're in some of the massive lagoons in the Seychelles or anywhere that you travel, it's big water. And so I'm not real comfortable recommending do it yourself, but use local resources if you're thinking about it. That's where I was thinking about, like kayaking or paddleboarding. Certainly, kayak, paddleboard around some of the local Fort DeSoto in Florida, some of the local areas where you're close to shore and you know where you are, you know where you're going, and you know what you're getting into. So there's three ways. You can travel company, kind of that intermediate where you're using your lodges and your local trout shops to help you out, and then the do-it-yourself. As far as travel, I am gonna throw a pitch in here for somebody. There's a woman-owned travel agency that used to be associated, still is, but it is free now from Yellow Dog in Bozeman, Montana, and her name is Kimberly. And that woman can get you anywhere in the world and get you back safely. I see Rachel doing a big thumbs up. Get you anywhere in the world and get you home safely. Highly, highly recommend using a super reputable travel agent who really specializes in this kind of travel. This is different than I'm going to go to Germany and I'm going to go on a Viking cruise. This is entirely different to be in the Maldives or in Belize or in Mexico or in the Bahamas when there's a stage 4 hurricane somewhere on the horizon. It's a very, very different situation. So Kana Travel, Kanna, in Bozeman, Montana, and Kimberly, speak to Kimberly. She's a lovely South African with a lovely accent. The second point I wanted to talk about briefly was to insure or not to insure. This is about your own personal risk benefit, all right? Some people, say Bill Gates, could spend $40,000 on a trip, and if he doesn't go, he doesn't go. Who cares? It's chump change. He's got it in his back pocket. It's not me, and it's probably not most of us. Some people would not tolerate an $800 loss because the weather turned horrible in Louisiana. And even though my guide says, come on down, we're still fishing, I don't want to fish because the weather's horrible in Louisiana. And I'm going to see my $800 fly out the window. I can't tolerate that kind of loss. For me, the only trips that I don't insure, and I often don't insure, but they're not expensive trips. And they're trips where in my mind, I think the only reason I'm not going is if I'm dead. And if I'm dead, I don't really care. COVID has changed that. Many, many, many lodges, including Belize, now force your hand on insurance, that you must have travel insurance. There is an expensive product, cancel for any reason. The day before the trip, if Omicron 2 surfaces, oh gosh, I don't want to go. I just don't want to go, but I'm healthy. The planes are still going. The country I'm going to is still open. They're still fishing. I just don't want to go. I'm nervous. Cancel for any reason. I literally can call up and say, I'm not going. And I will be able to recoup whatever it was that I spent on the trip. So it's an expensive product. And then there are less expensive products that protect 70 to 80% of your investment for reasons like somebody in my family is hospitalized. I'm hospitalized. The weather, my plane never took off, for other reasons. There are many different policies. The two companies I would mention tonight, and again, I have no financial association with either of them, is Global Travel, which many people here know about. But Global Travel, which is very reputable, honestly, in my personal opinion, dirt cheap. I think an annual policy with Global for evacuation, emergency evacuation, runs about $330. Try and find an insurance product that only costs you $330. And that's for medical evacuation anywhere in the world. And then ripcord like on a parachute is another one. And there are a few now that are bubbling up since COVID to protect people from in their travel situation. So whenever you're planning any type of travel for fishing, you need to look at to insure or not to insure. My mom and dad are both gone. My sister and brother are both healthy today. So, I'm pretty free. I can pretty much so go, and I'm not worried about, something's going to happen to my mom while I'm gone. But that's not always everyone's situation. I know there was one of my friends who went with Rachel down to Argentina recently. Her dad is elderly and frail, and I know she was very anxious about traveling. She's someone I recommended that she insure her trip because there was at least a possibility that she would pull the plug. The last thing I wanted to talk about was post-COVID travel, which is insane. We're not post-COVID yet. We're a lot less COVID since Russia invaded Ukraine, but we're not post-COVID. I'll just give you an example. In January, traveling to the Seychelles, I had 57 pages representing 13 distinct documents that I needed to enter the Seychelles. And I needed 2 paper copies of both. So I needed 114 pages of paper copies plus electronic that I carried with me to the Seychelles. And that's after having acquired a Seychelles travel authorization online. Sounds like I'm going on. Traveling, I just got back from Belize yesterday. The day I went, I got my COVID test, my PCR. I arrived in Belize, with my COVID test. Okay, I'm all ready with my COVID test and my passport. I'm all ready. And I get to customs and nobody's asking to see my COVID test. And I'm like, don't you want to see my COVID test? And they said, no, we dropped that today. So March 1st, Belize has dropped the PCR COVID. So Americans can travel into Belize, no longer requiring a COVID test. The United Kingdom has dropped COVID testing. To return to the United States, however, I needed not a PCR, but an antigen test performed within 24 hours of my departure from Belize. So I still need a test everywhere in the world. You need a test 24 hours from departure before returning to the United States. And we're all hopeful, very hopeful that stuff will all go away in the not too distant future, but it is tough to keep up with. And I got to, where I was in Houston, I'm going to get on an Emirates flight to Dubai to go to the Seychelles. I have my 57 pages times 2 plus electronic plus my passport. I hand them this Bible-like stack of papers. And the young man, look, and he goes, "Where's your visa?" I said, "I don't have a visa." He said, "You need a visa to travel to the Seychelles." I'm like, "I don't need a visa to travel." I'm arguing with the gate end, And 2 people later, they said, "No, she doesn't need a visa." So even the airlines folks are struggling to keep up with this on a day-to-day basis. You can never be, all the casting, all of the flies, all of the lines, the tippet, the buffs, the 50 SPF lip stuff that you're going to take with you. All that stuff is for naught if you're not if you don't get on the plane and you can't get in the country to fish. I wanted to mention, folks told you about themselves at the beginning. I'm telling you about myself at the end. I'm an extraordinarily blessed human being. I mentioned I'm a retired physician. I'm a retired critical care physician, which plays right into saltwater fishing. If you have to, if you have a chance, do it. If you're going to Florida, on vacation with your family, find somebody to walk you out on there are flats on the Gulf Coast. I'm pointing because I'm sitting on the Gulf. There are flats on the Gulf of Mexico. I walk down to the Gulf of Mexico 4 out of 5 days a week with an 8-weight, and I've caught flounder and sea trout and whitefish and something that cut my hand really bad. I don't know what that was. Now I have gloves. There are pompano out there. There are redfish out there. There are snook out there. You don't have to travel to the Seychelles.
Thanks, Joanne. And we are affiliated with Global Rescue. So I put the link in there. So United on the Fly does have a link. So y'all can get it through. All right. Good night, everybody.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
And again, Circe, Stacy, Joanne, thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you.